Let's see what this is about. How to configure a DNS server. Okay. Hello, could you please explain how to configure a DNS server, Raji? Sure thing. I'm assuming you mean on the computer itself, because that's pretty much the only time you would configure a DNS server, and that would be on a local computer as somebody who does tech support or help desk. So if you go, well, okay, so there are a couple of ways of getting to this. If you go to where your clock is on the taskbar and right click the icon for your network or internet, if you will, select Open Network and Internet Settings. So there are a couple of ways of changing this. Usually you never have to do this. Usually this is always done automatically unless you're working for a company that specifically has to have specific DNS settings or pointing to a specific DNS server. And that's usually done on a big private network. For example, let's say you work for, I don't know, AT&T, and AT&T has locations all over the world, especially, tons of offices, probably like hundreds of offices, big, I'm talking like corporate places in the United States, not to mention all of their stores and stuff like that. So that being said, okay, let me do this again. So right click, open network internet settings, and then you can see the first thing you see here is the Ethernet, and this is what you're connected to, whether it's wireless or Wi-Fi, it's gonna show up there. So the first place you can check this is if you select properties right here, and then if you scroll down, you'll see the settings for it right here, IP settings. So this is a simplified version of it, of what you typically see in the IP version 4 and 6 configuration that you would normally see under adapter settings. Adapter settings meaning for your internet, whether it's Wi-Fi adapter or your physical Ethernet adapter that you plug in your cable into. So what do we see here? There are a couple of things we can see here, and we're going to concentrate on the DNS settings here, DNS server. Right now, this adapter is using AT&T local.net DNS server. So for those people who don't know what DNS server, and I've talked about this, talked about this many times before. So instead of going to, for example, google.com, or instead of typing in the IP address for google.com, you can just type in google.com. And that's what DNS does. It does that for you, so you don't have to remember the IP address for google.com, because it can change often too. So you don't have to worry about remembering that. Typically, websites, you want them to be on a static IP address, but Google and big sites like Microsoft, and they do change occasionally. And for those reasons, you need a DNS server that will handle that will know which what the new location of the IP address is. So you don't have to worry about IP addresses. You don't have to type in address for google.com. Here, let me visualize this for you a little bit more here. It's not a typical, this is not a typical help desk ticket, but this is good to know. And I'm just going to explain it to you. Ping google.com. I think I've done this in a previous video, or maybe the video before that. Right now, Google shows up as IP version 6, which is right here. So that's the IP address for google.com. So instead of you remembering that, who can remember this, right? To get to google.com. All you have to do is just remember google.com. And this part of it, remembering the IP address, is handled by a DNS server. And DNS server can be anything. It could be google.com. Google has their own DNS server. In my case here, it's AT&T. And that's the name of the server. So if you want to change that for some reason or add more, this is something you may have to do for some odd reason. This should be done automatically and already set up in a business environment. But let's say you work for AT&T and then you want to add more DNS servers for AT&T, which may reflect the IP addresses for like internal websites. So let's say AT&T has AT&T local.net. This may not be something that you can reach when you're on the internet. So, or something like it. It might be an address that's blocked from the internet. And for those reasons, you need a DNS server that will handle those on a local network only for AT&T people that work for AT&T. And for those reasons, you may want to add another DNS server that will handle that instead of you having to remember the IP address of attlocal.net in this example. I hope that's fairly easy to understand. And if you want to change that, here if you select edit and then select manual, you can simply make changes too. In this case, you would have to add the IP address, and well, obviously, you pick which one you want. And in this case, let's pretend that we're adding Google here. Here is our IP address. Oops. Sorry, it ran away from me. Okay, Control C. Okay, so it's an IP version 6, and the same deal with IP version 4. You select that, you expand it, and this is to basically if you're going to use a specific IP address. But here is where you would add the DNS information right here. Okay, so this is basically changing the properties of your network adapter, including the IP address, subnet prefix, all of this, gateway and all this. And if you want to use preferred DNS and alternative DNS, this is where you would put the secondary location of DNS. And yes, you can just type in google.com here. I almost typed in google.com. So if google.com is your DNS provider, you can type that in. I think it's actually different. I think it's for Google is like an IP address. Let me see what it is. All right, Google DNS servers. Okay, so here they are. Here they are, public DNS servers for Google. So you would take this, copy. Again, you shouldn't have to do this manually. There is the first one, and here's the backup. Okay, and then you just click save. Of course, here you have to make sure that you use the correct IP address that's assigned to you and this and that. And that's one way of adding it. Again, you shouldn't have to do any of this. All right, now let's go back one, and then look at adapter properties. So this is the beginning. Remember when we right-clicked our icon here and then open network internet settings. And the first time we went to the properties of the internet, and that's one way of doing it. But if you want to look, this is how it used to be back in Windows 7. You can still do it. It's just that they don't want it. They kind of hide it from people, so you have to make more steps. So if you want to change the adapter settings, meaning your Wi-Fi or your Ethernet, you select Change Adapter Options. Okay, and pick the one that you're using. You can have multiple ones. Here is the one that I'm using right now. And it's the same one that we just looked at. So if you right click it and go to properties, okay, type in your admin password. So what was it that we changed here? Remember we changed IP version 6, and here it is. We can do the same thing that we just looked at before. And here's the IP version 4 if you want to use that as well. So let's just pretend we're doing IP version 6 again. It doesn't matter. IP version 4 looks the same. Here it is. If you want to add those preferred DNSs right here, just select this, make sure that's opened up, and then type in, I think I already have, that's the secondary for Google. And the main one is just 88 all throughout. So for some reason, if you ever need to do this for some reason, you can certainly do that and select OK. And I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, because actually setting up actual DNS server, what you saw before, like attlocal.net or the one we just added, then that's something else that's way more advanced, and then it's not something help desk should worry about. But I highly encourage people to explore this type of knowledge if you have time and if it's something that you understand at this time. If you don't understand what I'm talking about right now, that's okay. Still thrive to learn help desk, and that way when you learn more computer things, the things that you don't understand now, you'll be able to understand later. And trust me, this is kind of funny thing. The more you kind of work with computers, the more you kind of get how they work, and all of this stuff will become easy. So I'm just going to reply, and I'm going to say you can set up DNS servers through adapter settings. I'm going to say network adapter settings. Also, please watch my video explaining this. Explaining this. Okay.